So the GSIs have been doing a lot of work getting everyone assigned into sections, and that's the current section times there. If you are looking for a section and you have not got a section assignment yet, is there anyone here who's still in that position? Oh, quite a few. Okay. Well, if you can, stick around a little at the end of the lecture, and we'll talk to you then about seeing if we can find a section time that suits you. Okay. Anything else? Everyone can get on to BSpace. Yeah, you found the site and so on. And let me just remind you, the readings for each week are, you can find them on the section of BSpace, the course website, where it says lectures. Okay, today we're looking at Nagel's article, What is it like to be a bat? This is one of the most influential articles, maybe the single most influential article written in the last 60, 70 years. It's the foundation of most of the work that's done nowadays on consciousness. Even people that don't explicitly cite it, you can see that they have it in mind somewhere. So we'll look at this article today, and on Friday we'll go on and look at Nagel's piece about split brain patients. Incidentally, there are some wonderful videos on YouTube about split brain patients. I'll send round links to one or two of them. So if you can, I encourage you to look at the split brain patient videos. But meantime, let's look at a natural way of thinking about the relation between mind and body. I said last time, the big thing that really puzzles people about mind and brain is when you want to know how it is with someone else, what you're trying to do is get some imaginative understanding of that person. You're trying to get things from their point of view, see what their perspective is. And that really seems important for just the most basic knowledge of what to do about other people, how to be concerned about other people. If you've got a 6-year-old child that's behaving badly to someone else, what do you say to him? Assuming it's male, as they so often are. What do you say? You say, how would you like it if it was you? Imagine that was you. Imagine that was being done to you. And the puzzling thing is, you've got that imaginative understanding of someone else's mind. You can get what it's like to be there in someone else's mind. You know you ought not to treat them that way. But then on the other hand, there's knowledge of their brain. And knowledge of the brain seems to be something quite different to that imaginative understanding. So how can these two, your imaginative understanding of other people and your knowledge of what's going on in their brains, how could that be somehow the same kind of thing? And here's a natural way to think about it. You could think, I've got two kinds of spaces here, two different ways of explaining what's going on with other people. On the one hand, I think of them imaginatively. I project myself into their situation. And on the other hand, I can think of them as a physical system governed by laws, a collection of neurons, cell assemblies, all governed by the inexorable laws of physics. And these are two different ways of thinking about the same thing. So you could think of it on analogy with the relation between chemistry and physics. I'm just curious, how many of you guys are science majors? How many humanities? Or non-science at any rate? Yeah. Okay, that's not a bad split. That's pretty good. Okay, well, you can talk me through this because my chemistry... I'm about to tell you the limits of my chemistry, so you can tell me if this is right, what the relation is between chemistry and physics. At the when the 19th century was becoming the 20th century, around the end of the 19th century, there was a puzzle about the relation between chemistry and physics. Now, what does chemistry have to do with physics? In chemistry, they were looking at chemicals. They were looking at the laws governing the combination of elements into compounds. They were dealing with puzzles like, how do you differentiate between a compound and a mixture? So they had laws that told you in what proportions two elements would combine when they made a compound. So when elements are combining to yield compounds, they do so in characteristic proportions. And chemistry at that time gave each element a number. It said, that's the valence number of that element. And then you can say, well, I can read off from the valence number of the elements in what proportions they're going to combine to give you a compound. Am I going too fast for you? Okay? So you got laws governing the combination of elements stated in terms of valence numbers. Meanwhile, physics is looking at what the ultimate constituents of matter are. Is matter made of atoms? Can atoms be divided into further particles? And that's just a quite different endeavour. These look like two different enterprises. So what do they have to do with one another? When you were explaining why two elements combined in the proportions that they did to give you a compound, you didn't need to know anything about the atomic structure of matter. You didn't even need to believe the atomic theory of matter. Indeed, lots of influential physicists at the end of the 19th century did not believe the atomic number of theory of matter. You could do pretty well as a chemist, even though you didn't know anything about physics. But then there's the breakthrough when you say, chemistry has these laws governing the way elements combine, and I can explain them in terms of physics. The trick is, you can give a definition of valence in physical terms. So, in physical terms, what's the valence of an element? It's you got the atom. You've got atoms of that element. You've got an outer ring of electrons, and then you have gaps in that outer ring, and the number of gaps in that outer ring is the valence of the element. That's how it was when I was at school. Is that still correct? It's something like that, right? I think you said I think you guys are all science majors. Isn't that right? Something like that is right, right? Once you've defined valence, it must be right. No, nobody's complaining. Right? Yes? Oh, you mean that is right?
I was just going to say, when I was in a chemistry class, it was the number of electrons in the outer shell.
There was a number of electrons in the outer shell, right.
Yeah.
That's right. Very good, okay. We're on the same page.
Okay.
The key point is, you've got this notion of valence that you defined in chemistry. You didn't know anything about physics when you're defining that notion of valence and saying how the elements work. But now you find you can define it in terms of basic physics. And now what happens is you can explain the laws of chemistry in terms of basic physics. It turns out that it's because the atoms have that structure that the various elements combine the ways they do. So you've reduced chemistry to physics. Hence, Rutherford's claim that there is only physics and all the rest is stamp collecting. If you understand basic physics, then you understand the whole of chemistry. All that chemistry adds is a whole bunch of details about how various particular atoms or molecules work. It doesn't add anything deep. It just adds a lot of complexity. So you've explained all the chemical laws in terms of physical laws. And generally, that often works. People say, well, lightning is discharge of electricity. Now, once you get that, you can explain all the phenomena of lightning as electrical phenomena. If you say heat is motion of molecules, then you can explain all the things that puzzled you before about what heat does by saying, well, it's motion of molecules. You can explain it in physical terms. If you have an ordinary cook's understanding of heat, then you know that when you heat water, it boils. Once you've got it, that heat is motion of molecules, you can make sense of boiling in terms of motion of molecules. You can explain everything that you didn't understand before in these more basic terms. Or once you know that water is made of the H2O molecule, you can explain why water dissolves things. You can explain why humans like to drink water. You can explain why water has the boiling point it does, and so on, all in these more basic terms. So phenomena involving heat, for example, get deeper explanations when you explain them in terms of motion of molecules. So if you take something basic, that everybody knows that if you pour boiling water into a glass, then often enough the glass will crack. Well, everybody knows that, but why is that? Well, because it had boiling water poured into it, because heat is motion of molecules. When the water is very hot, well, I don't really have the technical vocabulary to explain this properly, but when water is very hot, all the molecules bustle about at a great rate, right? And the faster they go, the more likely they are to hit a weak spot in the glass at great speed. And the more likely you are, the more likely it is for the glass to crack, right? So it's just speaking as a cook with no notion of the atomic theory of matter. You knew that hot water would cause the glass to crack. But now if you know the physics, you can give a better explanation than you did before of why the glass cracks. You can give deeper explanations. But now how does it go for the mind and the brain? Is it like that with the mind and the brain? So you say, look, just as a physicist can give you an analysis of what valence is or what heat is, so too a scientist can tell you what the experience of redness is. You can say, look, it's the firing of this set of cells in V4. Or you can say, the pain that you feel, that is nothing but the firing of C fibers in your brain. That is what science does, right? That is what science is telling you about the mind. So then you could explain all the facts about human psychology in terms of the more basic underlying physics. Just as you can reduce chemistry to physics, you should be able to talk about the mind to physics. Just as you can reduce chemical explanations to physical explanations, there's the imaginative understanding that we ordinarily have of one another that's so important practically in everyday life. That's the only guide we have as to what to do in everyday life. That's all we have to go on. It is really basic. But we ought to be able to give deeper explanations of that in terms of brain phenomena, if this is the right picture. Yeah? But how could that be right? If you've got an understanding of the physics of water or the physics of any element, then you understand everything about how that thing behaves. But suppose you go back to an example I gave last time. You're sharing a house with someone who you find quite alien. You don't know, you don't understand what's going on with this person. Are they happy? Are they sad? You can't get an imaginative understanding of what's going in there. So then you say, well, I can find out about this person's brain. I took a scanner home with me. I can get every physical fact about this person's brain. I can predict what he's going to do. Look in the scanner. Look at the laws governing the brain. Now he's going to go and make coffee. Now he's going to go out of the front door. Now he's going to do this. You can predict every movement that person's going to make. If you had enough computing power, if you were fast enough, you could scan this person well enough, you could predict every physical movement that they're going to make using the scanner. So you just are exploiting the physics of this person to predict every single thing that they're going to do. Do you, as yet, know anything about this person's mind? You don't know the first thing. You don't know why they're doing any of that. In the chemistry physics case, once you got the physics, you got the whole lot. You don't need anything else. But in this case, in the case of the mind and the brain, you can have the whole physical story, and the mind can still be a complete mystery to you. Just one second. Just one other example. Suppose that there is a just suppose there is a politician you admire. There is someone you think, she does great work. And then they do something that just seems like a disastrous mistake. And you think, why did you do that? And then your friend in biochemistry says, actually, we have had her scanned for ages. We knew everything about the firing of cell assemblies in her brain. We could predict that she was going to do that. That doesn't answer your question. You wanted to know why that catastrophic mistake seemed like a good idea. You haven't understood anything as yet about why she did that. So what I'm suggesting is that you don't give deeper explanations by saying things like pain is C-fiber firing or anger is activity in the amygdala, a part of the brain. You're not helping. You don't get any deeper explanations. When Barack Obama said, it's important to see the world through the eyes of those who are different from us, the child who's hungry, the steel worker who's been laid off, the family who lost the entire life they built together when the storm came to town. When you think like this, when you choose to broaden your ambit of concern and empathize with the plight of others, as I said, that's the only guide you have as to how to behave with other people. When you empathize with the plight of others, whether they're close friends or distant strangers, it becomes harder not to act, not to help. If this kind of picture was right, then Obama would have been wrong. Because really, who cares about empathy if you can just scan people? That should give you the deep explanations as to what's going on with them. And that should tell you how to behave. But the fact is, the brain scans tell you nothing. The explanatory things you want to know about from the point of view of how should I behave with these people, these are all made available to you only through your imaginative understanding of them. It's only you're being able to get into their perspective, imagine how the world is for them, that is telling you what to do. So you can't deepen those mentalistic explanations by going to the level of the brain. Okay, there were a couple of questions. One. Yes? No? Sorry? Uh-huh. Okay. Plain as day? Okay. Okay, so let's look at what Nagel does. Nagel's point in this article is really a way of making this kind of thing very, very vivid. Here's a quote from the article. If the subjective character of experience is fully comprehensible only from one point of view, if the subjective character of experience of what's going on in your mind is fully comprehensible only from one point of view, then any shift to greater objectivity, that is less attachment to a specific viewpoint, does not take us nearer to the real nature of the phenomenon. It takes us further away from it. So think about that for a second. If you think about pain, physical pain is bad. If you see someone in physical pain, then you want to help, by and large. But understanding why that is, why should you care about pain? You can only care about pain because you have an empathetic or imaginative understanding of what that's like. It's only your imaginative understanding of it that can engage your emotional reactions to the pain, that can make you act with respect to the pain. If you're told, well, the pain is C-fiber firing, that doesn't tell you, oh, now I understand why I care about pain, because it's C-fiber firing. C-fiber firing is awful. No one in their senses thinks like that, right? You'd have to be some kind of psychopath, some kind of sociopath to be thinking like that. No one cares about C-fiber firing for its own sake. The only reason you would care about C-fiber firing is you think, oh, that means they're in pain. I can imagine what that's like. So the key thing in Nagel's remarks here, and these are very important, resonant remarks, the subjective character of experience, what makes pain the thing it is fully comprehensible. You only get what pain is by thinking about what pain is like from that point of view. So if you try and have an objective scientific understanding of it, that's not going to tell you more about what pain is. It just loses the subject. Pain is essentially pain for a person, for a point of view. In the case of boiling, when water's boiling, you find out what the real nature of that phenomenon is by giving a scientific account. The science tells you what's going on when water's boiling, or the bonds between these molecules are loosening. That's a scientific account. Now you understand boiling much better. You don't understand pain any better at all by being told it's C-fiber firing. You just stop talking about the pain. At present, we are completely unequipped to think about the subjective character of experience without relying on imagination, without taking up the point of view of the experiential subject. And the key term there is imagination. So this is just talking through what it means to be conscious. What is it? I mean, humans are conscious, octopuses are conscious, I guess bricks and computers are not conscious. But what's the difference? Well, the fact that an organism has conscious experience at all means that there's something it is like to be that organism. An organism has conscious mental states if and only if there's something it's like to be that organism, something it's like for the organism. And then I mentioned last night, last time we talked, that bats are such strange creatures. Bats are such alien creatures to us. Presumably bats are conscious. They seem like they're conscious. But as he says, anyone who's spent some time in an enclosed space with an excited bat, he's clearly had some bitter experience here, trapped in a barn with a bat. You know, if that's happened to you, what it's like to encounter a fundamentally alien form of life. If I try to imagine what it's like for a bat to be a bat, I'm restricted to the resources of my own mind, and those resources are inadequate to the task. And if you think about the way bats work, is they have a kind of radar. They send out pulses of sound to the vicinity, and they listen for the reflections of those sounds coming back. But it's pretty weird because the burst of sound they send out has to be very loud in order to get enough reflections coming back. And their hearing has to be very acute in order to catch the reflections. Right? You following me? So if they just sent out a loud burst of sound with their hearing full on, they would deafen themselves every time. Right? Because that initial pulse has to be very loud. So what they have to do is switch off their hearing, send out the pulse, and then immediately amp up the hearing to get the return coming back. And what they're trying to do is to catch moving insects. They're trying to catch insects on the fly. So they've got to be doing this very fast. They send out the pulse, switch on the hearing, shut down the hearing, send out another pulse, shut down the hearing, and so on. And they've also got to watch for other bats, because the other bats can jam them by the pulses they're sending out. And as you know, bats, you often see whole stacks of bats squealing about. So what's that like? Can you imagine that? What kind of sensory experience is the bat having? All this is happening so quickly. It's got to get flying insects, which are really hard to catch. In contrast, the kind of imaginative understanding that you or I can have right now, if I try and imagine what the room looks like from your perspective, or you try and imagine what the room looks like from my perspective, that's easy. We take that for granted. The point about thinking about bats is that you suddenly realize there's something that we are doing with each other the whole time that you just can't do with a bat. To the extent that I can look or behave like a wasp or a bat without changing my fundamental structure, my experience is, you can dress up like a bat, right? If you really get into the groove here, you could try strapping on the costume and so on, but you could try opening and shutting your eyes pretty fast. It's really not going to help. You are not going to be there with a bat-conscious life. Or you might say, well, it's not enough I put on a costume, right? What I have to do is take out my brain and put in a bat brain. And then I could do it, right? Then I could imagine what it's like to be a bat. But of course, presumably if I took out your brain and replaced it with a bat brain and said, well, now you know what it's like to be a bat. Well, I'd have killed you, I guess. And what I've got is not really a bat. What I'd have is, well, I don't wish to be rude, but some kind of monster here, right? So Nagel says it's doubtful that any meaning can be attached to the supposition that I should possess the internal neurophysiological constitution of a bat. You just can't do it. You can't get inside the bat head. So there are limits to what you can imagine. And in a way, we all know that anyhow. If you meet people you don't know very well, if you meet people you don't like very well, sometimes you find it difficult to get into their heads. The bat is just a kind of limit of that, where you can't get into its head at all. Yeah.
So when Nagel says that when you try to explain that scientifically, it takes us further away
Yes.
from the actual experience, I don't understand how that's possible if we're already so far away from that experience. How does that take us even further?
Well, you bring me on to the next comment. Right, that's a great question. Right. If we're already so far away from the bat, how does the scientific thing take us any further away? Well, the thing is, if you're looking after bats, you can have some schematic understanding of what's going on with the bat. I mean, you can know that it's hungry. Yeah, I guess people who look after bats can know that it's a good idea to feed them. You can know when they're not feeling well, something like that. You can have what they call some schematic understanding. If you've got a whole bunch of penguins, you might think, well, what's that like being a penguin? Must be cold down there. Aren't you cold a lot of the time? But you could get some schematic understanding of the mental life of the penguin. But what you can't have is any kind of detail. What you can't have is the kind of detail that we ordinarily take for granted, that we can imagine each other's mental lives with. Now, the thing is, that means there are a lot of limits on what we can know about our world. Because of these limits in our imagination, there are facts about our world that we can't know to be true. There are facts about what it's like for the bat that you can't know, I can't know. No human will ever know those facts. We can't even understand what they are. You couldn't even be told them by God or anyone what those facts are. They are just forever beyond us. But at the same time, it is entirely possible to pull a bat apart, cell by cell. I mean, people already have pulled apart the brain of the sea slug and mapped completely every connection between the neurons in the sea slug brain. There's a complete computational understanding of the sea slug brain. In principle, you could have a complete computational understanding of the bat brain. Pull it apart cell by cell. Why not? You can have a complete physical understanding of it. Will that tell you anything about what it's like to be a bat? Will that tell you anything about the thing's mental life? Well, it obviously won't tell you the first thing. It wouldn't even tell you when it's hungry. That's what I mean. The scientific understanding takes you further away in the sense that it means you don't know the first thing about this creature's mental life. The scientific understanding can be complete. You can have done the whole thing. There's just nothing left to do scientifically in understanding the bat as a physical organism and still know absolutely zero about its mental life. Because its mental life is how it is from that point of view. And the science is objective. It's not from any point of view. Yep.
Well, okay, so I think
Can you do that loud? There's a, yeah.
I think I understood the point that you're saying.
Yeah.
Nothing of the subjective experience can be represented by any sort of physical reduction or any sort of scientific
Right.
information, right? But would you still hold that opinion if those formulas or let's say explanations could reproduce the event, right? So imagine a sci-fi film like
Yep.
Star Trek, right?
Sure.
Where Spock can touch another person's brain and fully experience their past, their present, and know everything about what it's like to feel,
Right.
So if you could create such a device,
Yes.
that's explained by the laws of physics, that allows you to feel what another person
Yes.
feels, would you then still maintain the thesis that the physical form tells you nothing about the subjective experience?
Yes.
Because that's the essence under it.
Well, let's take this slowly. I'm all in favour of the Spock gadget. Let's do it, right? Let's suppose I can touch your head and I understand exactly what's going on in there.
Right.
Yeah, I get a full imaginative understanding of that. Yeah. Now, the thing is, if you think about the chemistry physics analogy I was giving earlier, or the boiling water and the glass kind of analogy, then suppose you never heard that there was such a thing as a glass cracking. Yeah? Or suppose you never heard that there was such a thing as two elements combining. If you found out the basic physical laws, if you got the basic physics of the situation, then you could just read off from that. Hey, look, we get all the molecules whirling about faster and faster. We put that in my glass. It's just kind of obvious. The thing is going to crack. You could read that off from the physics. Yeah? You don't need to know about that stuff in advance. Yeah? So similarly, if you've got a whole bunch of elements and you find out about the physics of the atoms containing them, then you can say, let's stick them together. I bet you they'll combine in these proportions. Yeah? I mean, presumably that's what happened with the atom bomb. For example, they said, look at the basic physics of the situation. I bet you if you do this, there'll be a hell of a bang. You see what I mean? Yeah, you can just read off from the physics what's going to happen. Now, the cheat about your gadget, yeah, is that you said, in virtue of the physical laws, you get the imaginative understanding. Yeah?
Right.
Now, the thing is...
Imagine that there was such a...
Right, that's right. Now, look, my point about the sea slug or the human brain is, I write down all the physical facts about the sea slug brain, yeah? And you just look at those facts and you try and read off from that. What's it like being a sea slug? What's the mental life of the sea slug like? And my point is, you can't do that. You could do it with physics and the cracking of the glass. You could do it with physics and the combining of the elements. You could not do it with the computational structure of the sea slug brain or the bat brain. and pain or any other bat, or what it's like to have bat sonar. You just could not do that. Now, the cheat about your gadget is you say, I agree you can't do that, right? I agree there is that basic asymmetry between the case of the mind in the physics and the case of the chemistry in the physics. You're agreeing there is that asymmetry. But you're saying, suppose I've got a gadget here, and it does it, right? Well, the trick in what you're saying is, how is the gadget doing it? That's the puzzling thing. What the hell is it doing? Is it doing some kind of computation? If it's just doing some kind of computation from what's going on down here to what's going on up here in the mind, then you or I should be able to hand simulate that. We should be able to work through that and understand how that is being done. But that's the whole point about the bat. We already agree that you're not going to be able to imagine what it's like in there, even though you've got all the physical information about the bat. And then you're told, but I've got a gadget that does it. I put my gadget in a bat, and now I know what it's like to be a bat. Well, you can postulate the gadget, yeah, but all you've done is create a mystery. It's like saying, well, God told me. God could tell you. Well, okay, but what we really need to do, it's not really so much that, it's not that I wish to radiate skepticism about poor old God. It's that the thing about the chemistry and the physics is, in the case of the physics, in that case, you didn't need God. You didn't need the gadget. You could just do it direct. You could just read off. If I get all these molecules spinning around, I'm going to get a glass cracking. Yeah? You didn't need God to tell you that. You could just figure it out. You couldn't just figure this out. You needed your gadget. You needed something kind of supernatural where you don't really understand how it's working to get you that difference. Yeah? That's why I say it's kind of a cheat. Because you postulate the gadget. I'm all for the gadget. Maybe the gadget exists, right? But the question is, how is that working? We have no idea how that is working. Yep.
Taking that experiment down a notch, the thesis that you have about how if we focus too much on the mystical laws, we will lose sight of the real nature of the situation. What I think is, say, for example, the physical law that anchors in the amygdala, if we were to put a bat through a social situation.
Put a bat in a social situation. Uh-huh. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, yes.
Interact with another bat.
Yeah.
And then in a controlled experiment and see what makes her amygdala stimulated, then
yes.
it would be more better to understand just what type of emotion that they feel under certain stimuli. Because I doubt that the way that we respond to things is completely universal across organisms.
Yep. I completely agree with everything you say, that if you look at bats in social situations, you could figure out something about their emotional lives. Yep. I think the thing about the amygdala is just a dummy, though. You didn't need to be monitoring their amygdala to get that result. If you just look at the bat in a social situation, you may be able to figure out, oh, they have friends. They have enemies. You see what I mean? You could get something about their mental lives from that. I don't at all disagree with that. The key thing is, what's bat sonar like? Yeah. And that is not going to help with that, to get the social things. You could find out they're gregarious, or maybe they're not gregarious. Maybe they don't really interact socially. Yeah. So I agree you could get a further fix in their mental life. But the first thing is, the shuffle through the brain is really a kind of dummy here. Because you could have done that without bothering to monitor their brain. And the other thing is that the key thing that Nagel was talking about, namely, what's bat sonar like, what's bat experience of the world like, that is as far off as ever.
But their experience of the world, I feel like if we were to maybe better understand what parts of the brain are stimulated under certain external stimuli, that may take us closer to be better able to empathize or something like that.
I think the thing with the social thing, we could empathize anyway. But look, with the bat sonar, really such a lot is already studied about bat brains and bat sonar. Yeah? It doesn't take us a bit closer to being able to imagine what that kind of experience is like. Yeah? I told you just a little bit when I was talking about the pulses. Yeah? Did that help? That just made it seem clear that you're not going to be able to do it. That was why I told you that. Right? Because once you get the detail on the underlying physics here, you think, my God, I have no idea what that would be like. Yeah? Yeah.
It's more like if you know if they're happy and sad or in a certain situation, you know that, you still don't know what it's like to be.
Exactly. You're not getting the detail. You're getting that kind of schematic understanding of their mental life, but you're not getting the details filled in.
Figure out like the physics of their brain. Like you can understand that, but still you don't know what it's like to be happy.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. Okay, let me just whiz through this. We will come back to this stuff soon. I just want to finish with some remarks about the difficulty then of thinking in terms of a scientific study of the mind. People often say we have to study consciousness scientifically. And there's a kind of gee whiz element to that. Doesn't that sound kind of, wouldn't that be wonderful? A science of consciousness. But look, science is trying to describe the world as it is objectively. That's what science is, right? Science is nothing if not objective. That is the whole point of science. There's a world out there. You have your own point of view in that world. But what scientists are doing the whole time is trying to abstract from any particular point of view in the world and trying to get what's going on out there independent of any point of view. That's what science is. That's what they do in physics. They're trying to describe what's there independently of anyone's point of view on it. But remember that remark of Nagel's, every subjective phenomenon, every phenomenon of the mind, every phenomenon of consciousness is essentially connected with a single point of view. And it seems inevitable an objective physical theory is going to abandon that point of view. You're not going to get an understanding of bat consciousness by any objective description of it. You can know how the thing is wired up computationally, you can know what its physiology is, but you're not going to get onto what it's like to be a bat. Therefore, it's not just that, it's very difficult for there to be a science of consciousness, or the brain is so complex that it may take many years before we have a science of consciousness. The thing is actually a contradiction. There couldn't be a science of consciousness. Consciousness is something that can be understood only imaginatively, only from one point of view. We can only understand the significance of pain, for example, only by understanding it imaginatively, taking up the other person's perspective, taking up the other person's point of view. If you take up science, then you are abandoning that viewpointedness. You are throwing away imaginative understanding. That's just what science is. That's what it does. It throws away viewpointed imaginative understanding and says we want to know what's really there objectively, independent of any one point of view. So it's not just that it's hard to see how there could be a science of consciousness, a scientific account of the bat that would tell us about its conscious experiences. A scientific account of human consciousness would be something that didn't depend on any point of view. But then it's not describing a specific point of view. So it couldn't be both. It couldn't be both objective and giving you an imaginative understanding of a point of view. So if you ask, can we explain in scientific terms what it is to be conscious? The answer is that we can't do it. We can't give a scientific account of consciousness at all. The thing is impossible. And notice, people sometimes like to talk about souls or ectoplasm and say, well, this kind of reflection shows that there's more to the world than the physical world. That's not the point at all. If there was more to the world than the physical world, that would be to say there was some kind of other objective stuff that we could study. That's where the consciousness comes in these wisps of ectoplasm. But it's not that there's some other objective stuff there. All that's objectively there is the physics. It's just that the mind can't be understood objectively. It can only be understood imaginatively. Okay, that's the end of the message for today. Thanks, great questions. See you on Friday where we'll talk about Nagel and split brains.